Episode of Sports and Songs podcast. I'm your host, Dan. Today is November 27th, 2022. We're on season 4, episode number 2. This is the songs episode, strictly songs. We're doing an album review today. The album review we're going to do is In Your Honor, the 5th studio album by American rock band Foo Fighters. Here we go. I'll bring it up there. There is the Foo Fighters, In Your Honor. Let's get into it. It's the 5th studio album, released in June 2005. It's a double album, with the first disc containing heavy rock songs, the second containing mellower acoustic songs. Frontman Dave Grohl decided to do a diverse blend of songs as he felt after 10 years of existence. The Foo Fighters had to break new ground with their music. The album was recorded at a newly built studio in Northridge, Los Angeles, and features guests such as John Paul Jones, Nora Jones, Josh Homme. The lyrics deals with resonating and introspective themes, with a major influence from Grohl's involvement on the campaign trail with John Kerry during the 2004 presidential election. It's also the first album to feature keyboardist Rami Jaffee. Now, I was and still am a big Foo Fighters fan, but once Dave Grohl got into politics, I'm not as big of a fan. We'll just leave it there. But he was really getting into politics, and I liked his music beforehand. But you can see some of that easing out on their recent albums. This album was nominated for 5 Grammy Awards. It didn't win any. It was nominated for 5. Moving on. After touring in support of One by One, the previous album, Dave Grohl was uncertain as to what to do next with the Foo Fighters. He felt that rushing to do another record would not be creatively rewarding. Grohl considered a possible film score and began writing some acoustic songs, eventually amassing a full album's worth of songs. But Grohl didn't want to make a solo album, and he knew the Foo Fighters may not like this, but he presented it to them saying, should we do an acoustic album as the Foo Fighters? Well, bassist Nate Mendel said, well, who's to say what we should sound like? He said that the songs are the uncharacteristic sound of these songs should go on the record. Grohl later decided against an acoustic record, saying, I have to have loud music, rock music in my life somewhere. And it was at that point they decided to do this double album. One CD is all really heavy rock shit, he says, and another that's, quote, really beautiful acoustic-based, lower dynamic stuff. The album was recorded in a new recording studio built in a warehouse in Northridge, California, named Studio 606 West, in contrast to their normal recording studio, Studio 606. Studio 606, Dave Grohl built in his basement in his home in Alexandria, Virginia. That's where he's from. A lot of references there on earlier work from the band that he was with called Scream back in Virginia, outside of D.C. His studio was called 606. They moved out west, built a new one in a warehouse, and called it 606 West. The sessions to record this went from January through March 2005. They only spent 2.5 weeks on the acoustic record, but they recorded 40 tracks. 40. 40. 15 of those were acoustic. 25 of those songs were rock. So they had 40 songs to go with. Only half of them ended up on the final list, on the final track list. This double album is 20 songs, 10 on the first side, 10 on the second, for a total of 20, but they had 40 ready to go. Taylor Hawkins, the late Taylor Hawkins, longtime drummer for the Foo, did a song called Cold Day in the Sun. That was his first song on lead vocals. This was 2005, so he got into the vocal side and later started a band called Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders, and they released I think, 3 albums. But he did Cold Day in the Sun, which after an attempt to do an electric version became an unplugged track, and they put that on the acoustic side. Hawkins plays tambourine and sings vocals, and Dave Grohl's on the drums for that song. So listen to that one. Uh, that's a favorite of mine. I think you'll like it yourself. Guests on this album include Norah Jones, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, and Queens of the Stone Age, Josh Homme. Now, John Paul Jones agreed to appear on this album as he was in LA at the time for the Grammy Awards. Grohl described his appearance as the second greatest thing that has happened in his life behind his marriage. So Grohl gets Led Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones to appear on his album. That's awesome. He also brought in Norah Jones. She did a song called Virginia Moon. Now that song features, it's more of a jazz song on the acoustical side. It's done in jazz. No one in the band knew how to play jazz guitar really. So it's Dave Grohl's guitar tech, Joe Beebe, actually plays lead guitar on that song as he's the only one with jazz experience. He appears on one song. Next page, the tour. The tour began in the summer of 2005, but in late 2005, they toured with Weezer. I attended that tour. That's where I got the shirt here from the Foo Fighters. In late 2005, they toured with Weezer. I'm not a big fan of Weezer, but Weezer opened up with them. Foo Fighters played the main show as the headlining act, but they called it the Foozer Tour. Foo and Weezer, the Foozer Tour. Great show. They played at the Xcel Energy Center. Foo always puts on a great show. The album entered the Billboard 200 and the UK album chart as number 2. Not 1, but it topped the charts at number 2 behind Coldplay. Coldplay's album X and Y came out that year, and in fact was the best-selling album in all of 2005. So Foo never got a chance to leapfrog them. They never got as higher than number 2 because they had to compete with Coldplay that year. Here's the tracks. Now keep in mind the In Your Honor, it's called In Your Honor. It's kind of what I would call Dave Grohl and Kurt Cobain were good friends. They were roommates in 1990 when they were started in Nirvana together, and they became close. The death of Kurt Cobain had a big impact on Dave Grohl, and he went through a phase of depression. He remembered first working with Kurt Cobain and how in awe he was of the talent that Kurt had, the musical talent. Kurt Cobain always considered himself a poet as his career. He was a poet. He did songs, but he was an artist that was a poet. And so this album is called In Your Honor. It's a nod to Kurt Cobain, is really what it is. Here's song 1 on the electric side. Song 1 is called In Your Honor. That has it kind of touches on how he's honoring Kurt Cobain here, song 1. Song 2, and this is the electric track now. All these tracks are electric, heavy, hard songs meant to be played with the volume up. Song 2, No Way Back. Song 3, Best of You. That's the first album or first track they released, Best of You. Song 4 is DOA. That's the second single that was released. Song 5 is Hell. Song 6 is The Last Song. This deals with, once again, Kurt Cobain. The lyrics are, this is the last song I dedicate to you. Once again, paying homage to Kurt Cobain. Song 7, Free Me. Song 8 is Resolve. Resolve has some Cobain features as well, as far as getting his head around the death. Now, the death was in 1994. This album is 2005. Still dealing with the loss of his friend. The song Resolve is about Cobain. Song 9 is The Deepest Blues Are Black. Song 10 is End Over End. End Over End, to me, has a feeling of going round and round, ending one stage of your life, beginning, being reborn. It has an reincarnation feel to it, as far as Dave Grohl singing about this. Let's finish this chapter of our life. Let's move on to the next. Let's finish this. Let's move on to something new. So that's the tracks on disc 1, all electric, hard rock. Song 2, disc 2 is all acoustic. 10 songs. First song is called Still. This lyrics here center around Dave Grohl, who witnessed a suicide when he was 10 years old, living in Virginia. A man jumped onto the tracks of an oncoming train, and that really hit home with him, dealing with the scar of witnessing that as a young child. That's what that song is. Song 2 is What If I Do? Song 3 is Miracle. Miracle is one of the songs that John Paul Jones plays on. The next song is Another Round, also John Paul Jones, former Led Zeppelin. Friend of a Friend. Song 5 is Friend of a Friend. This is written directly about Kurt Cobain. This was written when they were roommates in an apartment in 1990. Never got released. Very impactful song also. Not about the death, not about the resulting death of Cobain, but knowing him as a friend. Song 6 is Over and Out. Song 7 is On the Mend. Song 8 is Virginia Moon. That's the song with Norah Jones on vocals. Song 9 is Cold Day in the Sun. That's the Taylor Hawkins. Very good song. Dave Grohl plays the drums on that song. And remember, Dave Grohl was a drummer with Nirvana and before that, and didn't become a singer guitarist until the Foo Fighters. Song 10 is Razor. So what we've got is a total length of the album, both 83 minutes, 17 seconds. Here's the band, the personnel of Foo Fighters: Dave Grohl, of course, lead vocals, guitar; Nate Mendel, bass; Taylor Hawkins, drums; Chris Shiflett, lead guitar. And once again, we've got Joe Beebe appearing on that song Virginia Moon, playing the jazz guitar. He appears there. Rami Jaffee, former Wallflowers, with Jakob Dylan, played with the Wallflowers for 15 years. Rami Jaffee appears here doing 6 songs on this album. Norah Jones is vocals on Virginia Moon and also plays the piano. Plays the piano. And so this whole In Your Honor is a nod to Kurt Cobain. He knows, I think it's very obvious, Dave Grohl knows what happened in the Cobain death. It certainly was not a suicide. I think, this is just opinion, but I do think that Grohl made a deal somewhere along the line, and I don't know if someone threatened him or not as far as coming back to never speak about it. Whenever you hear Dave Grohl talk about the death, he always goes along when he's talking verbally that it was a suicide. And there's nothing more to look at. There's nothing more interesting. So it makes me believe that there was a threat or a double cross or something involved there with the death. Now, ever since the murder, I'll call it, is Foo Fighters, whenever they release an album, there's always at least one song that deals with the death of Cobain. Touching on Courtney Love. He's letting people know that he knows the story, but he's not talking about it. The deal he had must have been something about talking or speaking, because he's certainly writing songs about the Kurt Cobain murder and how it impacted his life. And he's trying, each of these albums has one song at least that are exposing the deals, the things going on behind the scenes, that he's letting folks know he knows what's going on. And I've always loved the Foo Fighters albums because of that. I like their music, but the lyrics are the main thing when you're listening to Foo Fighters song. Most of them are fun, happy-go-lucky songs, but if you can find the song on each recording, each CD that has something to do with the murder or Cobain or Courtney Love or something involved with it, those seem to be the best, because he's He's divulging information on each album about um, the death. Now, we've never done a show on this, and I'd like folks' opinions on this as well, because we could do a bonus show on this, but the Kurt Cobain murder is well documented. Lots of information on that. It certainly was not a suicide. It's not a conspiracy theory either. But if you get a chance to read the books on the murder at Lake Washington, Tom Grant, a former private investigator and police officer, wrote a three-part book, 3 parts, to talk about Kurt Cobain's murder. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Lays it out exactly what happened, what was involved, who was behind it, and how it had to be covered up. And this goes up to high levels of the recording industry, recording um, executives that wanted to make sure that this never got touched again, because a lot of people made a lot of money on the death of Kurt Cobain. Now, he does this album in your honor, and the song, the last song, that clearly says, this is the last song I'm going to dedicate to you. He's basically saying, I'm going to shut down this chapter in my life and move forward. Now, the interesting thing is, on subsequent albums, he does touch the subject, but he doesn't direct anything towards Kurt Cobain or about Kurt Cobain. He goes after other people. Remember, In Your Honor closes the book, closes the chapter on him talking about his dear friend, Kurt Cobain. If you get the album Echoes, Silence, Patience, and Grace, there's a song called Let It Die, directly directed to Courtney Love. Very interesting lyrics. The next album, Wasting Light, there's 2 songs that deal with the murder of Kurt Cobain. One is I Should Have Known. Another song, lyrics heavily directed toward Courtney Love. Just read the lyrics to I Should Have Known. How he know right away from the very beginning that she was a bad match for him. They were not meant to be paired up together, with her background and his background, and how it ended. I should have known. He said it was no surprise how this is all going to end up by him getting involved with someone like you. And then there was a song on Wasting Light called Dear Rosemary. Now, Dear Rosemary is directed toward attorney Rosemary Carroll, whose husband is Danny Goldberg in the recording business. Now, she was the attorney for Courtney Love, and then she was the one that later on found a practice sheet in Courtney Love's backpack that showed her writing page after page after page of learning to write with cursive that mimics how Kurt Cobain wrote. It was her practice sheets. Now, she never turned that sheet over to authorities in the investigation. So he's calling her out on this song called Dear Rosemary, writing it directly to Rosemary Carroll, saying, you knew something that could be impactful of how she wrote and how she practiced to write just like Kurt Cobain on the practice sheets. And because it was Courtney Love that wrote that final paragraph on the suicide note. The alleged suicide note was written by Kurt Cobain, the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, written by him in his handwriting, saying that he was quitting the band and moving forward with his child, Frances Bean, and he no longer wanted to be involved with Nirvana. He never published that. He never sent that off. She found that letter that he wanted to quit the band and added a paragraph at the end saying, I'm sorry about all this. I'm going to kill myself and end my life because I'm so depressed. That last paragraph, the writing is very different. And the investigations from Tom Grant, the private investigator, have shown how that very last paragraph turned it in from a I'm quitting the band letter to now a suicide note. And that's where they got the suicide note from. But it was written, obviously, by Courtney Love. But the attorney knew about it, and could have simply turned it in, and to this day could have turned it in to authorities to reopen the case. And so he writes that to Rosemary, really going after her. It's one of the reasons I do like the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl songs, because he does do all of this. Now, I don't know personally, and maybe you can get some comments on the bottom of this in the comment section. I don't believe the other members of the Foo Fighters band know this, and they don't know who he's writing about. On album reviews for the Foo Fighters, A lot of these things, like even in Your Honor here, he spent all this time on the road with John Kerry, the Democratic presidential nominee, and said, I just want to give something back to John Kerry in a term of in your honor. I want to honor him somehow. Well, we know that's the response he'll give to what these songs are about, or the title of these albums. But he'll never tell the truth in an interview. He'll always say it's about something else. And so, In Your Honor certainly is not about John Kerry, because it talks about missing you and how life has changed since you are now gone and no longer here. And so, John Kerry obviously is not dead. So you can tell his interviews are very different than what the songs are about. The music videos for the Foo Fighters are also have nothing to do with what the lyrics are really about on these controversial songs. They're always about something different. It never ties to the two together. They're always fun, uplifting, but the lyrics are very deep and personal. That's the album review for In Your Honor. I do recommend picking it up. You'll like the first CD if you're into hard rock. You'll love the acoustical side if you're into that, the whole side together. Some of the reviews that came out with this was some of the reviews saying you could have eliminated some of the weaker songs on both CDs and put it together as one. Rather than having a very average double CD, you could have put together a very powerful single CD that could have sold. But remember, they started with 40 songs and drilled down to 20. They couldn't throw away any of these. All of these songs have meanings. And that's how they trimmed it down to that. Please leave your comments down below and your thoughts on some of these other topics as well. Thanks for listening.